So this is our talk working in virtual reality and Roomscale. So this is not a very technical talk. This is more about the experience of it and some kind of things we've learned and talked about while doing it. Before we start, I wanted to cover one thing. It is kind of an important thing to think about while you're working in virtual reality over these next coming years. This is all very new. And so everything we're going to say here today, take with a grain of salt, test yourself. There's a bias. Even if we don't mean to have it, we'll have a bias in the way we're working. A good example of this bias, why there's a cat picture up there, that's Boris, is, so Hollywood did this thing where if you would have looked at it in America all through the years, Hollywood said dogs are the most popular pet. And the reason was because dogs were really easy to train. So every movie featured a dog. You never saw cats in the movies, except for that darn cat, maybe. But so that was just their bias. So they had this, if you would have said, hey, should we make dog food or cat food? And you based it solely on that, you would have been making a mistake the whole time. So Reddit came around, or just the internet in general, and everyone started showing and sharing pictures of their cats. And you realize it was actually pretty much 50-50 cats and dogs. So there was this bias that existed for a long time, and now we understand that it's actually 50-50. We're going to have a bias with what we say because of what we're working on, the tools we're using, and the objectives we're having. So just always remember that. When we see anything, you want to go test it. You want to make sure that it actually works. And so now we're just going to go around and introduce ourselves.
Yeah, so I'm Sarah. I'm from the Hamburg-based VR Nerds Collective, and I'm doing a VR game called Lucid Trips. And in Lucid Trips, you slip into a bodiless consciousness and explore planetary dream worlds with only your arms. So it's also a locomotion method in that game.
Hi, can you hear me at all? Yes,
Yeah.
Great. My name is Julie. I'm part of the VRUnicorns, and we made a game called Selfie Tennis that is out already for the Vive on Steam, and we're still working on that and updating that, and we're also working on another game called Ski Jump.
Hi, my name is Chet Faliszek. I work at Valve. So at Valve, we made the lab and Steam VR to work with the HTC Vive, and if you're interested in working in VR, you can always follow up with me afterwards.
Hi, I'm Joachim Holmer. I used to work on ShaderForge, which is a Unity plugin, but nowadays I work on Budget Cuts, which is a room-scale VR stealth game. And that's all your fault, so yeah, send 8 emails to that guy.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dirk Van Welden. I'm from iLlusions. I work on Space Pirate Trainer, which is on early access right now. It's sort of a Galaga meets Max Payne kind of game, so yeah.
So for our panel, you've shipped a demo, but we have 2 people who have shipped actual games out there on this very early part of virtual reality. Both Julie and Dirk have shipped. So have you guys learned anything from shipping, or any reaction to your shipping?
You want to go ahead?
Okay.
Well, maybe we should also explain. So you guys are still in early access.
Yeah.
So it means that your ship is in early access. You're updating it all the time as well. We shipped Selfie Tennis actually a few days before the Vive had its consumer launch, so we shipped on April 1st because we thought that was funny. And I guess we should talk about sort of community reactions to the way that you ship to a market that doesn't exist yet, which is very interesting. So the good thing about being early on, and sort of alongside the Vive launch, was that you tend to get a lot of attention for what you're working on, which was really, really nice. And also you get a lot of early feedback, for instance, from other VR developers, because you kind of know everyone who has a kit, which was also extremely nice because people are very good at giving each other feedback in this community. Like the VR development community is fairly new in that sense that, of course, VR has been around for ages, but now it's accessible for small indie studios like ours and game jammers in general. It's really the game jamming scene that has been growing VR development to the state where it is now. At least I feel that, but I'm also a game jammer. And so prior to shipping, we already had our game out with quite a few developers who were testing and giving feedback, and you guys had the same?
Yeah. So we actually got the Vive in October last year, and I just started working. I was working on a whole different kind of project, so I already spent 1.5 years working on that one. Was finally getting somewhere, I got the Vive, and I just started gaming jamming on my own for 3 weeks, and I put a demo on the forums, and it got picked up, and right now, yeah, I dropped every other project, so it's all in the freezer for this one right now. We'll still be working on it for the next year. But like one of the things I've learned, like if you ever shipped another game, you know how the sales curve, what the sales curve looks like. It's normally like this anti-logarithmic curve that goes down, and you hope to be like stabilized at a certain amount of units a day, and this one was totally up. It's probably the same if you ship on a new system as well, or in a system launch. It's like you've got the spike. It's not so big because the audience is quite limited the first days at the 5th of April. So they started shipping on the 5th of April. There's at the peak, even people that didn't own a Vive back then, they still bought it because it got a lot of good reviews, and then it goes down and like it goes back up again. There's a slightly raising curve, and it's still raising. So it's a totally different curve than any other launch on a system that I already saw. And even like for this limited audience, it even did better than a previous game, which I spent 3 years on, and it sold like a lot of copies. It did better in revenue, so not in copies, but like that's pretty crazy. I never expected that, and it was pretty awesome.
I think for all of us who were part of the Vive launch, at least, like we prior to launch even, it was very interesting because we didn't really know what we went into, right? We'd been demoing, and you had as well, we all have been demoing our games a lot around the world, and then like to other developers and consumer expos and so on. But when you actually get to the point where you ship, and for us it was also our first launch ever on Steam, so we like honestly had no idea what we were doing. So we're just like, okay, let's do this and let's see what happens. So it's very fun to see how the community receives it. Also stuff with like our game it's selfie tennis. You play tennis with yourself and you can spank all the other characters in the game. That's kind of what it is. And now we add more and more content based on like of course our own ideas, but also to a large degree the players of our games. And people are very honest with us on what they think and what they would also like to see in the future. There are things we can do, and of course there are other things we cannot do. But it's very nice to have this lively community that you can actually say, hey guys, what do you think about this? Should we add this or should we add this? And then they give you feedback. Because people in general are very positive towards what you make because they also know you're in a new space.
Well, and so one of the interesting things in virtual reality using motion controllers is that people are physically doing the thing they're doing. They're not doing this abstract anymore of pressing a button to swing a sword or just aiming a gun. So what did you learn, Dirk? You learned some exciting things about weapons, didn't you?
Yeah. So it's like everything in VR has to be as natural as possible. So if something is just off and in this way in a certain degree, then people get like, this is not natural at all. So I had a lot of Americans and Russian people mailing me and posting a lot of stuff on Reddit that I had to implement a system that the gun angle should be adjustable. So I never shot laser pistols before, so I didn't know what the angle would be like. But people that were going to gun ranges every week, they had this kind of pistol with this amount of degrees, and they were losing their gun skills because of playing too much Spacepire Trainer. So I just implemented a way to change the gun angle based on the player's preferences. So that's one of the things that I actually did.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, something you have to think about in virtual reality is you're aping reality so closely that as you brush up against it, your physics better be right for tennis.
So the thing was, our team, none of us have ever played tennis, and we made a tennis game, which we thought was hilarious because this was the first time we could actually play tennis ourselves. And right before launch, like the weekend before launch, one of my teammates, Horatio, he was like, Julie, we need to try to go play tennis before we actually ship. And I'm like, why? And we had an argument for like 20 minutes on whether we should do it or not. And another team in Milan, he was also like not keen on the idea. And then finally Horatio convinced me, and I went and got some help. So like, I think I posted on Facebook, like, where is there a tennis court in San Francisco? And people helped us out. And we tried to play tennis for the first time ever. And I'm never going to do it again because real tennis doesn't make sense. Like, you drop your balls and like, you cannot just respawn, and like, physics are hard, and like, it's real exercise and stuff. But fact is, like, a lot of the community feedback was that our game was very unrealistic. And we're like, yeah, it's VR, you're playing with yourself, right? But what we're actually doing right now is, which we were very opposed to in the beginning, we're changing the physics a lot. And it's like, we've already had some updates that help out a lot, and we're getting closer to real tennis. Next weekend, we're having a test in a real tennis club, which I'm like terrified of because there will be real people who actually know tennis. And we just started to geek out on technical details of the play of tennis, which I never thought we would go into. We were like, it's unrealistic tennis with yourself, it's fine. But since like everyone can just pick it up and it's so easy to play, and also as you had the Space Rider trainer, just like go in there and it feels natural, then you also get feedback from people who actually know what you're trying to do, and just like take that feedback in. And it was fun in the beginning because we were like very opposed to like, no, this is our game, we're doing this. And then we suddenly saw, oh wait, we actually need to change a lot of things, so it makes sense. And that's one of the best things about launching, is that you get a lot of feedback from people who don't know you and don't care much about you, but they care about the game because they want to play it.
So out of the people out there, how many people are working on something in VR? How many people have shipped something in VR? Oh, okay, a few, nice. Oh, okay, well, you're with him. That hardly counts. No. So, one of the things, Julie had mentioned it as well, of when for the lab we started, it's a collection of small experiences, and it was purposely done that way. We started doing essentially game jams internally at Valve. We started experimenting with tools, with game types, with game experiences as the way to kind of see what worked best. Often, I spent the year before we announced, and even once we announced that we were doing virtual reality, I kind of spent the year working and talking to a lot of devs. That's kind of how I spend my time. And it would be interesting always is they would come up with ideas that I thought sounded like a horrible idea or a great idea, and that was never important because we always saw that you had to test the idea. We just don't have that vocabulary, right? If you're making a 2D game, there's such a large vocabulary that you can talk about your game that I can probably have a pretty good sense of how you talk about that, of how the game will be. But in virtual reality, it's also new that we always, and even internally, will tell each other, you've got to go test it, you've got to go try it. So for the panel, how did you guys get started? What was your way? Because some of you have been working in this space for a while now.
So we actually picked up VR not from a gaming background, but from a design background. So we worked a lot in 3D, and we had just the ambition to create something that is inspired by dreaming. So it has to have that locomotion method where you move around with your arms, like some people do it in dreams. So fly dreams are really common. And there was the Oculus DK1, but no motion controllers, but the Hydras worked very well with that. And so we just put together our setup to get our ideas started. So there you shouldn't keep track or care about hardware restrictions. That was really something that brought us forward, that we just had this idea in mind and didn't adopt some setup that was there, so like a gamepad or something. But really went further with that idea. And then, we went on to the Move controllers with the PlayStation and the DK2, and then finally the Vive came, which really had our setup. I was totally shouting at Chet when I first noticed that they will have the Vive, I need to have this. I'm carrying so much shit around me with the PlayStation and stuff like that. But it really brought us forward to just have that idea in mind, what we want to do and try out, and just keep it going and try different ways and learn. So in the beginning, we had loopings and stuff. We were flying, pushing ourselves off. We did stuff that people were really getting sick of, which we noticed during the process. And it helped us a lot. So now we got actually a version that is pretty stable regarding motion sickness. So we added some details there. But I think we can get to that point later again. But it's just be open to your community and just try things out, because you never know how it will work. So we didn't want it to be close to reality. That's why we couldn't look at things like how is a real tennis racket working. But we had to just feel okay, how do we want to feel if we want to feel dreamlike and weightless, and what's working best? And it shouldn't be natural or normal or anything reminding you of anything that you do in the real world, but totally different.
There are a couple of reasons why Space Pirate Trainer is the way it is right now. First of all, there was no shooter at the Vive at that time, and I just wanted to shoot lasers. The other one is The movement system, I was actually one of the first supporters of the first Oculus DK1, and I was super susceptible to motion sickness. So I was very sure I would never create any VR game. And when the Vive came out, and they actually solved all of the translation problems, that's when I was actually thinking like, this could be it. So like in Space Pirate, you're running around like crazy, but you're still always introducing your movements by yourself. And so that's one of the reasons nobody ever got sick in a Space Pirate Trainer before. And I did like hundreds of demos, and they never got sick, unless you don't hit the 90 frames per second, of course, if you don't have the right specs for your PC. And the other thing is why stuff is so easy, like incoming bullets that go automatically. You can actually, there's a good example for it. If you bought a console like 15 years ago, it was super simple. You had like directional buttons and 2 other buttons. And if you see a console right now, and you see an Xbox One controller, for example, it's just crazy. If you give that control to someone who never used a console before, it's way too difficult. And right now, here it's the same thing. You want a VR game that uses as less buttons as possible to make it more natural, so that people are just doing things with 2 buttons even. So it's a very good thing that we don't have like 15 buttons on the controllers, and you have to take it very easy. Maybe like in a couple of years, everything will be more difficult and all the gameplay mechanisms will be more difficult, but right now we're aiming for like basics. We need to write the basics as well.
People can just pick up the controllers and play, right? And that's what's so important, especially like all of us, we're so used to being out at events and demoing, and at one point you have to like overly explain everything. It's not, like you realize that you have some design flaws, whereas people can just pick it up and play. So either whether you have a tutorial in there or it's just very simple, that's definitely the goal you should target when it comes to controls.
It's kind of the beautiful thing about games like Tilt Brush or Job Simulator. You're pretty much only using one button if you want to do the basic interactions. And it's one of those things that you can just give to your grandma and she can play. If she's never played games before, she can still play it. And you know, she knows how to walk around, she can do that. She can pick stuff up using just one button, and you just have to teach her that thing. And it's a very cool thing that you can do that.
And I think that's also what we all worked a lot on, because as Sarah said, like they were very early with Lucid Trips. You guys have been working on this for years, and like we were actually working on a whole nother game. You guys kind of designed your games for the Vive from the get-go. Like when we got the Vive last June, I think we just started game jamming, prototyping on it, and we realized the other game we were working on was never really going to work on Vive, and we had so many fun prototypes. And then actually that's the story of Selfie Tennis, was that was made in one day in the office, and suddenly we just decided that was going to be the game that we were actually going to launch. Like we were working on another game for years where we started on just with a gamepad. It was kind of a walking simulator, which is one of the most uninteresting things to do in VR in my opinion. And like that just didn't translate well into the Vive, because suddenly you could move around your full room scale and you could do so many things. So you wanted to interact with the world in a whole other way than we had thought of from the get-go when we started in VR some 3 years ago. So, and I think like it's very fortunate to like just get the toys in your hand and then just start working on a design idea that you have, right?
So one of the interesting things of when someone would join the VR team at Valve is the first thing they would say is there's not enough buttons on this controller, let's add a bunch of buttons. And it was a conscious decision that we got rid of X, Y, A, B. That was when we made another controller, the Steam controller, that has that on it, right? Like every controller, it's kind of had that for a really long time, and that's a very natural way to use that. But the problem is, like you're saying, is if you've never played a game or you've never interacted with that, when your head's covered, you have no idea what the X button is. You have no idea what the A button is. But what people do remember really clearly, and remember this when you're making stuff, is they remember their physical movements. They remember large, gross movements. So where's the shield in a Space Pirate Trainer? You go like this to pull it back. Once you do that motion once, you never have to remember it. You never have to like have your fingers memorized. The muscle memory comes very quick. And so as you're kind of pushing out your UI and your interactions, think about it that way of like how I don't want to add a bunch of buttons, I don't want to add a bunch of density, I don't want to add a bunch of layers, right? Like I don't want to go down too deep on any menu system. I have the whole world out here. My mouse used to be on a 2D plane, and here I have 6 degrees of freedom. I have spots in my body that I'll remember. You can make some guesses on that of like lower, behind the head. Obviously we're not tracking the full body, so there's some things you have to watch out for there. But you do have this body and you have this movement that you can use, that you can put your UI into. So don't be scared of doing things like that.
Yeah, the
Right.
thing is, we have the entire world right now, right? And also the way that you created your locomotion system. I remember the first time I tried budget cuts, and I had to translate in my brain, okay, how do I use the sort of portal to actually get somewhere? And as soon as I got it, like, you have photos of me rolling around on the floor because I was hiding behind things inside a budget cut. We didn't have much space. It was actually in Mac's office in Stockholm, and I just kept smashing controllers into floors and stuff because I was just rolling around. I was just immersed instantly because when you get the controls, then you can do the world, right?
Yeah, and it's something we're pushing for quite a lot in the game because it's something that's haven't really been possible before. Well, I guess you sort of had it with something like Kinect that would sort of track your body, but you weren't really there. It was still this layer of abstraction between the player and what's going on in the game. But in VR, you are the person in the game. Like, you are the main character. There's like when you're playing budget cuts, there's no button for leaning left. There's no lean right button. There's no jump button. You do that physically if you want to do those things. Nobody needs to find the crouch button. It's like, if you want to hide there, just crouch and hide. Or if you want to lie under this bed, just go under the bed. It's like all of these natural interactions. It's quite fascinating to see people play a game where they figure all of these things out themselves because they use their bodies all day long, so they know how to do it.
Well, and that's, budget cuts is a good example of, if you guys seen it yet, where you toss out an item essentially that is where you're going to teleport to, and that's how they solve movement over larger spaces than your room. A lot of people always think like, oh, these are unnatural movements, any kind of teleportation is not going to feel natural. But it ends up your body gets really quickly used to, if the rules are really defined clearly and it has a natural feel to it, you quickly make that be the mode that you transport yourself in. So much so that in budget cuts, there's this weird thing where there can be a knife down there, and instead of just walking down that's clearly in my space, I will throw the teleport thing there a couple of times to get it right so I can teleport and grab it. Your body really gets used to that kind of thing really quickly. It's kind of like when you ride a bike or when you drive a car, but all of a sudden your body's being asked to do a motion in a bunch of different ways to transport yourself, and you naturally kind of attune to it. And we see that in VR as well. So, trying things that nobody else has done and see if it becomes a natural thing where your body will just accept that as your motion.
Well, and also, especially sneaking around corners, that's the best part of budget cuts, because you can do that and no one will see you because you actually have the portal, so you can look through that. So that's one of my favorite things to do.
I think a good thing is inventory systems totally changed with the movement. So you can easily drop things from here to there. You can stash them in your backpack. So we, for example, have a backpack over our head, but also in budget cut, it's really good to have inventory systems in another way. It's not like on a game anymore where you have to press buttons. So you can really stash them somewhere, also in your backpack or something, and then pull them out.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we learned during development in terms of interaction, interaction in VR is very different. Anytime you try to port some 2D system into VR, it generally doesn't work that well. So one thing we had was, we wanted to switch tools, sort of like switching weapons. So we basically ported the radial menu you have in console games, where you push the analog stick to a side, and you get this radial menu of all the items. So we were trying to do that with a touchpad, and people just didn't really get it, even though we had visuals and everything to tell you what was going on. So it just never worked. We had I think we had 5 different iterations on that, and it just never worked well. So then what we ended up doing was we sort of made a physical version of an inventory system instead. So you press the button, and then it detaches the current tool you have attached to your handle, and then you see all the items in front of you, and then to equip it, you just push the controller into it. And the first time people do that, they just get it after that. It's like, well, of course I need to pop out the inventory and click it together. So it's in terms of interaction, it seems like if you go for everything that's more physical and more tangible is always better than any 2D system that you want to port to VR.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be as physical as possible. Yeah, right now we're still using the dialogue, but I was actually thinking about also removing because everything that's physical, people just get it instantly. And you need to use as less buttons as possible, unless they're even at first when the Vive just came out, I was like, oh, these grip buttons, you just press them accidentally. And now if you're using it more and more, you can actually add it as some sort of grab, and once you press them, you can grab objects, and it makes sense. Once people know how to use that specific button, they just do it in the right way. It just has to be very physical, I guess.
Yeah, but you really have to get to know these buttons. So newbies to the controllers, it's like super hard to explain the buttons to them. That's also, when we started, we had no buttons like on the controllers. We just used the controllers like with physical interacting, jumping off, spreading arms, things like that, because it was so easy and people weren't used to these controllers at all. But now as the Vive came, we also added some buttons, but we noticed that it's a lot harder for people to press buttons when they're not like from a gaming background or something, especially.
Yeah, and I think what's really important, especially when we're working on the Vive, is like keep the core gameplay very easy accessible, and then if you have other features like hidden features and whatnot, cheat keys, like then you can advance more from that. But like the core gameplay should very much be pick up and play, and so I come from the Copenhagen game jamming community where we've been using the Move controllers quite a lot. So when I try the Vive for the first time, I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. We have a trigger, we have a stick, like it's fine. This makes a lot of sense for us because it's very intuitive, and I can also see when people pick up the controllers, no matter where we're demoing, whether it's just to my family or friends or where we're at, like the first thing they do is they pull the trigger, and it's like, okay, so like. What we realized was put the core gameplay on the triggers, and then whatever we want to use the other buttons for, we can do things that are not as important as the core gameplay.
Yeah.
And so for everyone out there, when you guys are working on your VR, are you playtesting it with strangers and people out in the kind of the community?
Say yes.
Right?
Sure.
It's always important to playtest. But also when you're playtesting, I think a really important thing is to realize that the first time, if someone's never done VR and the first time you put them in a modern headset, they're going to tell you whatever you made is great.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to be like, oh, VR, this is awesome.
Yeah, we've had quite a few of those experiences with budget cuts because we have physics objects in our world that you can interact with. We had, at the beginning of the game, you just start in a hallway and then you go to a storage room with a lot of items in there, and then there's like the rest of the game. But like people just stand still in the storage room, like picking up items, throwing them on the floor, like laughing and like having fun, and then they're like, oh, awesome game, guys, and we're like, that's not the game. Like, please keep playing. But,
that's what's so important, especially like, I could see I started demoing VR content, like I made a game with like in a cave and a wolf, and I think you were one of the first players of that. I went to Poznan Game Arena and showed it, and there was literally a line of like 1 or 2 hours, 3 days straight, and that was on a DK1 on a Mac, and people were just like happy to be in VR because it was most people's first VR experience. And at one point I realized, okay, this might not be the best audience to get negative feedback from, because sometimes you need to, like positive feedback is great because it boosts your self-esteem, but it's actually, if people care enough about expressing their negative feedback, there might be a little bit of truth to that, no matter whether I get offended or not. But the thing is that if you only have yes-sayers around you, or it's only your friends, or it's only people who are in the same space and whatnot, like you need to be able to test on a variety of people. And listen to the negative feedback. You can take it in or not. Like sometimes they just want to complain about something that you thought you did right. But other times it's just really valuable. And you should always look at aggregated feedback, and especially also when you launch. Look at aggregated feedback, because like there might be one person who really wants one feature, but if you have like limited resources, your team isn't that big, then focus on, okay, majority of people want this person might have like some truth to that, but let's try to meet everyone's need and just be very open in your communication in general and say, okay, we can work on this for this update, and then we'll try to push this thing in later. I think that's like leading back to our community feedback question.
Yeah, just one more thing. Like when someone is saying I'm getting a bit sick in your game, there's probably a lot of people getting sick in your game. We did a test at Nordic Game Festival. Maybe we can check it here as well. Like out of all of you guys, who is like haven't even felt a bit slightly nauseous while doing VR? Can you raise your hand? Like you can already see it's like 50-60% that actually. It's not like, oh, you're the only one having this problem. No, if someone gets sick, it's probably because you have too much acceleration in your game, or there are some frame rate problems. So that's something that you should really take care of.
It's motion sickness is one of those things that you have to start early working with, and you have to decide early on, like if you want to make a game that can trigger motion sickness or not. And like for us with budget cuts, and for you as well, like we don't want to make games that make people sick at all. So that has a lot of gameplay implications, like in terms of what you can or should do in a game. And it seems like pretty much all of motion sickness, at least right now, with a high-end hardware, because it used to be a hardware problem where you had like, you didn't have low persistent displays or you didn't have positional tracking, but now the hardware is really good, especially the high-end hardware like the Vive and the Oculus, where it's no longer a hardware problem with motion sickness, it's more like a software problem, because now you need to design your experiences in your games so that you don't cause motion sickness. And it seems like it's this weird thing where it's like it's sort of solved, but also not really. Like the solution seems to be to just not accelerate the player. And that's about it. And then keep the acceleration one-to-one with their actual
again,
movement.
it's interesting, right? It's interesting. I can see, especially when working on Ski Jump, which we only spent a couple of weeks on, like a month ago, and an early prototype back in November. But we accelerate. We don't actually. Yeah, we do actually accelerate. But like very fast downhill. We have very few people who actually get motion sick in it. So I get motion sick from pretty much just standing. So I'm the first test on all these games, and we're still working on like how to tweak it so people don't get motion sick. Like you ski and you jump. It's very simple. That's what you do, and you knock things out on the way and you kill people, because that's what you do in our games. But it's interesting with motion sickness, because the problem is if people get motion sick from your game, they're probably not going to go back and play it, and that's the worst thing you want to cause any player, right? If you made a game, you want them to play it, and you probably want them to replay it again. So it's tricky, but as Joachim is saying,
you use really nice tricks in that game. So I was really fascinated because I didn't get sick at all, and I tend to get sick in some games. So I'm very used, but still, and I can feel it, and it's like you didn't have any texture on the ground. You could barely see the speed at all.
All white, because
just
you have
like
patterns.
some items there, you can see it, but you couldn't at all like have this peripheral view, which is getting strange and that stuff. So that's really important.
You can create a game where you're standing on a train or something that goes super fast. If there's not a difference in acceleration, you don't get sick at all. And you try to obscure movement, which actually works, which start to work. So if you're doing acceleration, you have to do it very slowly, and then probably it could work. So.
You pretty much have to trick your inner ear and like your brain, right? That's the thing. If you want to try to avoid getting people or yourself from that matter, that's how we develop games, so I don't get motion sick. But if we want to avoid getting me motion sick, and it's by also sometimes, actually to some extent, limiting player freedom, because for instance, one thing is player freedom, but also the player has to feel like they're in control of the acceleration if you have acceleration. But also we have a steering mechanic in Ski Jump where you used to be able to like steer on like from left to right really, really fast, whereas now it's just, as you're saying, like you're slowing down a bit, right? And it means that, okay, you're steering, but you're doing it very slowly. And tricks like that, it works, but as Joachim is saying, like it's a design question, of course, and then the code comes as well. But like prototype a lot, test on a lot of people.
I'll say, because they're all wrong. Because I played Krillbite at a game jam, made something that accelerated you around insanely fast. It threw everything up and around you, shoved you around, and you didn't get sick at all.
So
it was try it before we can say
that was what I was going to say. So that's why you want to prototype as early as you can. Even with the lab, the very first things before the lab, before we were even there, we were doing our first multiplayer experience back in 2014, way back. We went to the asset store, and we got models. I was a tree, somebody else was a bike, somebody was a book. It didn't matter. We just needed models, and we threw them in so that we could start testing. And I can't stress that enough. As soon as you have something, don't worry about sorry, no offense to artists, but don't worry about the art at first. Just go to the asset store. You can find something that it can stand in for what it'll become. Go there and start playing with it and trying things. I mean, that's how you find out what works.
Actually, maybe we should jump to talking about art style in VR games.
Sure.
Because we have very different art styles.
No, not that different.
Not that different, sort of. They're pretty.
About locomotion. No.
All right.
Well, yeah.
All right. I think a lot of like the larger audience is asking when are AAA graphics coming to VR, and you just have to take into account that you're running in almost 4K and you need 90 frames per second, and it's not super easy when you're combining all these CPU cycles with the GPU cycles and rendering a lot of stuff. There are a lot of tricks coming out right now to improve that performance, but like 1 month ago it was actually slower than it's rendering right now with the newest drivers and newest utilities. So you have to be careful. Like that's one of the reasons why if you look at Spacebar Trainer and the direction you're looking at and where the droids are coming, it's not super detailed. And that's because we never want to lose any frames. And that's why you see a lot of other games that are trying to do something more artistic and less realistic just to get that higher frame rate. You can't do Uncharted 4 right now on 90 frames per second at 4K. That's just impossible on the like hardware that's available for consumers. So it can be, but in a couple of years probably. So we have to do some design choices, I guess.
And also, if you want to do something extremely detailed and you're using loading, then make sure that your loading doesn't pop, because everything is so visible in VR. Like we were working before going into crazy self-attendance land and some of the other crazy games. Like we were working on a semi-realistic art style for another game, and like LUT pops, you see them instantly because you're in VR, right? So you notice everything much more than you necessarily do like on a 2D screen.
Yeah, and it's also about like making out details in VR, because like VR has a high resolution in terms of pixels, but like if you measure it in angles, like the angle to a pixel on, they look larger when you're wearing a VR headset. So it's harder to make out details. So if you have like small text or like gritty details, it's mostly going to average out into this weird blurry noise. So if you make like a super realistic art style, people can easier see the problems of the display because they can tell that it's low resolution. But if you make a game like, if you have a super artistic art style, like pretty much all of our games, it's harder to see the problems of the display, and it's easier to get into the experience and actually just play the game. So I think it's nice to have a clean art style, just remove too many noisy details, but still make sure that you have some sort of frame of reference to see the geometry around you.
And make it very simple. Like don't overclutter your scenes because you might not need it. Like don't put in unnecessary props because you don't need it and it can just hurt your frame rate. And then also another thing, as Chet was saying just before, like when you're prototyping, like, don't worry about the art. We use Unity as a store art for all our prototypes, or we crank out something like, I sometimes do the art, and I'm definitely not an artist. And then when we actually are set on, okay, this is what we want to make, and now we have most of the game mechanics in there, like have the whole framework and everything, then one of our artists start working on assets, because like, and especially as an artist, like we all go through several iterations when we're developing our games, and like both on design, on code, and on art assets, and so on. But since it is VR, and especially like I would say 2 years ago, you like on a Mac with a DK1 or DK2, like you're very limited how much you could actually have in the scene without having frame rate drops. So you might want to build up the scene, then make the assets for those specs and keep a high frame rate. Right? Don't overclutter. Like less is more, definitely in VR.
Well, definitely when you start, right? You're going to find that if you're not at 90 frames while you're in development, you're going to be sad panda working on your game. You're going to have to take breaks. But like we definitely found there's a use for detail often because it's how our brains understand depth and distance. So when we have a thing called the International, which is a tournament for Dota, and we actually visualize the arena that it's in. It's like a 30,000 person arena, and we visualized it in VR. And the first time we didn't have chairs in it. And it seemed tiny. It seemed super, super small, like we were all like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. This is not going to work. And then we put the chairs in, and instantly your brain was able to go, oh, I know, 300 chairs are each, this wide. I'm doing really fast math in my head and not really thinking about it, but your brain visually is able then to understand how big the space was, and it felt cavernous. So definitely you want to make sure that you're using detail and you're using those. You want to make sure when you look at it that you'll be able to get all those cues that your brain uses regularly. And originally I was going to start with this announcement, but since the website's not up yet, at some point today, US time, we're actually on Steam VR going to release the renderer that we used for the lab. So we have an increased renderer so we use Unity to make the lab. And we have a new renderer that we created for that helps with lights and shadows. So we thought those are the most important things. So if you go check out Steam VR at some point today, you'll be able to download that. It has all the source code. It's extensible to use. So that'll help. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to work in Unity for that, so that we could kind of have that experience.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, which is awesome.
We should do this for that.
Yeah. And to be clear, I had nothing to do with it. It's all Alex and other smart people.
Yeah. Like, and in general, no matter which VR platform you are on, like you can use Steam VR for pretty much anything, right? As it is right now. And I must say, like the first time I started using Steam VR, I'm like, wow, they made it easy for us, which is really, really nice. Especially that like pretty much everything looks great from the get-go. Even like my shitty art can sort of look okay because of Steam VR. So it's the shaders, the rendering, everything. And that's just like a small advertisement from my side. But it definitely made it a lot easier that I didn't have to do all those things myself.
It's also multi-platform because we saw some people playing a Space Pirate Trainer with a DK2 and a Hydras, which are not available anymore, and he actually got a very high score. So it's just we never anticipated on creating this for Oculus right now like previously, but yeah, they're already playing it with that hardware. So it's just because of OpenVR. That's pretty awesome. So.
Which kind of breaks our game. I mean, everybody can play with any controllers and any HMD, but it seems like Vive is the only one doing room scale properly right now. So if people play budget cuts, it sort of doesn't work. So. Yeah.
Well, I think for us, we just look at that and think that experimentation and the community pushing on things and trying weird things, trying the Hydra support was an interesting one. This ends up with a bunch of interesting results. I mean, because if anything comes out of this, I would just encourage you guys to experiment and try crazy stuff, because that's one of those crazy things you try. You're going to go turn to your friend and go, "Oh my God, you got to try this. This is amazing. You have to play it." And so, like, that's how I think we'll push forward in this kind of unknown space. So to that end, should we do some Q&A now?
Yeah.
We should. Yeah.
Yes.
Questions?
Does anyone have any questions?
There are free mics.
Or did we nail it and you got nothing?
There's one.
Only one?
Okay.
Line up. Yeah, two. Come on.
Step into the
Hello.
light.
Hey.
Yes.
I actually have two questions. First one is irrelevant, but it's a short one. What do you think about the third version of Portal?
I didn't hear his question.
Yeah,
No.
it wasn't loud. I think you have to go
Next
on
question.
to the next one.
Okay. What do you think about cinematics and where you need to get users' attention in VR, as you can't hold the heads of the players mechanically, physically yet?
So I'm going to use something you kind of mentioned just a second ago. Just so you play Portal 2, correct? Maybe? Did you play Portal 2?
Yes.
So I'm going to spoil it for people. Hope so. Plug your ears if you don't want to hear it. But you, at the end, you shoot a portal into the moon. Now, any player that comes out of that goes, "Well, yeah, of course I did. That was really obvious." That was like half a year of making that really obvious. That was a lot of painful work to get you in your head to think that this is the most obvious thing to do. And that's something games have had to do for a really long time. We do things with attention with light. So in Left 4 Dead, if you're lost, go towards the light. That's leading you the right way. In the Half-Life series, if you're not sure where to go and you're getting lost, I bet you there's someone shooting at you. And if you went their way, that's going to be the right way to go. Right, there's a lot of tricks we've learned to use.
I also wanted to say that before that it also closely related to the art style, because you have all that feedback like from the world where you should really go to, and you can add that to your art style as well. So we went on like that, so to catch the player's attention by having different blinking, glittery, nice, shiny things, whatever, sound.
Yeah, I think the more filmatic people just kind of need to look to the games industry. These are problems that we've been struggling with for a while.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I haven't tried all the games on screen just because I'm deciding which headset to buy. I have a DK2 and a Leap Motion, so I've tried the lab with that interaction, which was quite nice. The tracking obviously is not as accurate as a controller, My question is, when are these devices going to go to developing countries? So I'm in Africa, I'm in South Africa, and we can't even order or pre-order.
Where are you in South Africa?
Cape Town.
Okay, go to Broforces. They have one of our lives.
Okay.
And if they're not using it, just steal it.
Okay, cool.
And then return
Can I
it.
come get that information
They're
from
in
you
Cape
after?
Town. Yeah. But they're moving to Mauritius soon, so you better go
Well,
soon.
then I'll take it before they
Okay.
go. Please. I'm back on Sunday, so that's
Hi, great talk. Do you expect there to be a standardized first-person locomotion system in the future, or do you think that players will use their own locomotion system based on what kind of experience it is?
I think last panel we ended this as a disagreement.
Yeah, we were fighting, actually, mainly you and I. I said that I don't know, I come from a business background. We talk about de facto standards, innovation circles, and whatnot. I think at one point, someone will come up with something that we all think is completely obvious, and why didn't we think about it ourselves? And that might end up being the standard. Thing is, right now, when it comes to VR, and especially locomotion systems in VR, it's still so new and young, and we're all trying out many different things. Like, we have teleportation. If you guys haven't played self tennis, you literally just teleport to the other side of the court, but we have a delay on it, so it feels natural. You using somewhat a portal gun, and that's like when Joachim announced that he was working on budget cuts, everyone was like, gosh, of course, that's obvious. Why didn't we do that? And I'm sure there are like hundreds out there copying that right now. And then there were the guys, the Cloudhead that did Blink VR. And also we have, like, just for internal use, we have something we call the God mode, where like whenever you're just standing on your human scale, then the world is 1-to-1. When whatever you kneel like closer to the floor, the world is 1-to-100. It's not necessarily good if you're motion sick, but it's really fun to play around with. And like, there's so many things that you can do, and it's just about prototyping it. But I think a standard, so we disagree upon this. Chet says there'll probably never be a standard. That was how we ended up our fight last time, right?
The argument I would make is, unlike controllers or keyboard and mouse, where you have an abstraction, and so to control that, we create this standard so that we understand the abstraction very easily, because our bodies are never going to get used to it. In a regular motion, we get used to things very quickly, and they become second nature to us, and as long as they feel natural and consistent, that's the way we go. And so I think as we see different things like budget cuts movement versus space pirate trainer versus being teleported around versus using your arms, those all kind of work for what they are, and it's really about embracing your experience of what you're making. And I think that's an important thing for people to think about, because there's a lot of like, oh, I can't do this game I wanted to do because I can't do Call of Duty in VR because I can't run around and push the stick forward. Well, okay, but think about how you want to move around. Think about, one of the reasons why in the lab that it's curved, that you have an arc, is because we wanted to limit the distance you could go. You can't go forever if there's an arc, right? So, okay, so now we can do this. In budget cuts, there's a delay. There's like a time you have to use. There's a cost to that movement, right? So they all have these different trade-offs you can make, and it's just kind of embracing what you want for yours, and I think there'll be a difference.
So the minimum play area that is on the Steam page of every game, is there going to be some kind of more streamlined idea behind it? Because now you can have the issue where you have 2.9 by 2.9 and the game requires 3.0. Sure, you can go ahead and YOLO it, but
yeah, smash something. Have you played self tennis?
So it's early days. Giving that feedback on the forums, or if you want to mail me or whatever, like giving us that feedback and talking about what your expectations were, like, or your expectations of how you would make that decision are super helpful, right? I mean, I think just every single user who tries a headset all of a sudden is going to give us a bunch of feedback we've never heard of before, or their expectation or belief of how it would work would be different, right? And so just giving us that information is helpful.
Okay, one more question. Are you guys making something for VR, and is it Xortex from the lab?
Well, we made that.
A full game.
Well, we continue developing in VR.
Okay.
Hi. The market is somewhat relatively small now, so my question is quite bluntly, are you making money?
well, let's.
It's only us who ship, right? Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Do you have a return on your investment?
Yeah, of course. If you're not, like right now, it'll get better in a few months, but if you're not like this AAA that is working 3 years on the title and releases it right now, then the market is too small. But I already told it, I made more money with VR in like in 2 months than in my previous game, and I spent 2 years on that one. It was a moderate indie hit. So yeah, that means something, right? So you can actually make money if you're an indie team, obviously. But yeah, there are already like there's a whole wide range of titles coming out right now, so you need something that's quite new because people already get that you need to be unique in some way to actually sell, of course. And that's with every platform and every game. But once you have something that's very valuable, you can actually make money. Yeah.
My question is kind of similar. What's your thoughts on strategies for pricing games on that new platform? Keep in mind in the very early stage of that part of the industry.
Okay, I can answer it. Yeah? Okay, I'll go ahead. I actually told everyone before, like, I'm not going to talk about pricing. I'm not punching. I promise, no fights on stage, remember? Okay. Yeah. We were probably one of the first ones to announce our price. We're charging $20 for selfie tennis. That was converted to also 20 euros because the dollar was standing really strong when we announced the price, and 15 pounds. And we got quite a lot of beating for having that price. And as I said, when we launched, like selfie tennis was kind of core mechanic, which is you play tennis and then you're killing a few people. So we got critiqued for like it being way overpriced and not having enough content. And then I see it this way, like we also, as I said, we were out early, so people. No one else had really announced their prices. So we kind of took a little bit of a beating, and people were like, why should VR be so expensive and whatnot? And it's not because like we looked at the price that they saying, oh, these are our development costs, therefore we set this price. No, we were just like, okay, this feels right. Let's see what the market will say. So we got a lot of beating for that, but you can either choose to say, okay, we'll lower the price and we'll just panic and we'll just like do what everyone tells us to do. There will always be people complaining about the price, that's a fact. Or you can say, okay, well, we already told you guys that we were going to add more content, so we'll just continuously add content, and then hopefully you guys will think at one point that it actually matches the price. Of course, there are sales. Like we already did a sale with our publisher, which is Devolver, and there will be future sales as well. Pricing is interesting when it comes to a new market because no one really knows, and everyone is like tiptoeing a little bit around. Like there are other games that are priced way higher than ours. There are other games that are priced way lower. But fact is also, what was announced? Like 200 titles out for Vive, I think? Or how is it? I can't remember. There was some number somewhere. I can't remember how many titles are out. But like once things have settled a little bit more, then what I would do if I were you and I wanted to like look at how to price my game, probably find some similarities in other games, not necessarily content or gameplay or whatnot, but like maybe sort of replayability and focus on aspects like that and see, okay, this price is good for this type of game and my game is similar, so you could go for that. I know you guys, you had some price discussions before you pushed it out.
Yeah, just talk to other developers, and you know, like the 5th of April, the market wasn't that big because they started shipping then, and then I gave away a Space Pirate Trainer to all the devs. So yeah, I knew that it was a limited market at the time, and you can't like just ask like $5 for it because otherwise you don't have the budget to just continue working on it. So yeah, right now we're setting up the prices. We'll know there will be a certain like everyone will know like this kind of game. It has such an amount of content. It will be worth this amount of money. That will come. Right now we're really searching for licensing, for example, for VR arcades, and there's nothing set at all. So we don't have a clue how much we should charge for it. So we're just trying to work out a very cheap license and then just get numbers, like how many people are playing this, and then we can actually set a price. But right now it's more a gut feeling, I guess.
Yeah, and I also think, again, being early in a market space like this one means that you can just like run a little bit of trial and error, and like if you're okay with taking a beating for setting a high price, which we were and we are, like I'm not crying myself to sleep over people saying, oh, your game is way too expensive. What I would cry myself to sleep about was if people said, oh, we don't want to play your game because it's shit. Like that would be sad. But if they're only complaining about the price and saying, oh, we either want more content or it's too expensive for me, like, okay, that means that they actually want to play your game. And getting back to negative feedback is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It makes you think about where you should actually put your focus.
And I think we're also in such early days we don't have that vocabulary of people understanding what they're purchasing always. So I remember when we did our developer showcase, where we had 12 different developers showing their content. Some of the developers had been known and people understood and were excited about it. And the first time we showed a screenshot of Dirk's, it was like, why do I care about this game? It's Unity Store assets, a shooter. Oh, it's the stupidest thing ever, right? And then you would go play it. I even remember we had some of the press who were going to go jump on a plane and not play it. And I grabbed them. I'm like, no. You don't get what this is. Play it. The minute you play it, you're going to have an entirely different thought on this. You're going to have an entirely different value proposition on this. And so, all of marketing, we always tell you on Steam, you got to market your game. That's important. That's part of making the game. But now we've added this twist in VR and saying, you also have to educate the user on what this is, because the language you used to be able to use is gone. And so how do you do that? How do you get people out there talking about it? And that's going to be a problem, right? Or a challenge. And so you've got to step it up, and you got to think about that as you're making your game of like, how do we talk about this? How do we tell the press? How do we tell the community? What are they playing? What are they purchasing? What is the expectation?
Yeah, because it's like before you've experienced the game in VR, you don't know what it is, right? And that's the tricky part about marketing anything for a platform that people haven't necessarily tried or they haven't tried that game, right? Because
that's also why we have that like free demo. We will always have a free demo because our game is so experimental that no one can know it. So it's just like you can't know what's behind it, and you can't know if you like it, and that's why we have a really short free demo that everyone can be sure before he purchases.
And as we talked about yesterday with Dirk, as you said, like it's hard for you guys to have like a demo out there because like the game is like try to have Space Pirate Train with just as a demo, right? Like then you're playing the game, right? It's like run along, just like shoot and things come towards you and so on, right?
Yeah, I would say yeah. We got quick time for one more question, and that works out perfectly.
I received my Vive a few weeks ago, and I played the lab, and a whole bunch of Steam games are available. And while playing all these games, I had an idea for a more immersive experience where most of the game takes place in rooms, basically, and you'd go from room to room, and the room would be the scale of your room. And to go to another one, you would basically go to a door, you'd turn around, and you'd be in another room, but it's your room. Mm-hmm. And there's some problems presented with that, but I'm thinking that could be a cool experience.
Well, I think there are unseen diplomacies doing that, aren't they?
Yeah.
What's it called?
Unseen diplomacy.
Okay.
Yeah, they do that. But also I know other people who are prototyping exactly the same.
Yeah, they're making use of your space, and they're just letting you crawl into the same space, and you're actually feeling that you're constantly in a different space. Yeah. So it's very well done.
But go ahead and do it. If you want to develop it, do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's the thing clearly. If you're not developing in VR, don't be intimidated. Yeah. I am not good, and I can make things using Unity really quickly to prototype ideas and play around in VR. Like, you can prototype that whole idea pretty quickly, so just fire it up and go. It's pretty simple to get started.
Yeah.
At that, I would literally just use a collider and a trigger. It'll be fine.
Well, I live near Bellevue, so I'll come show you guys once I have it working.
Yeah, do. No, anyone making VR stuff, I joke that my job description is eat, drink, talk, and my goal is to see cool shit. So if you have cool shit, I'd like to see it. Just let me know, and be more than happy to check it out.
And don't be intimidated by using items for the assets, because my alpha, like he said, was just using a lot of assets from the assets store. Right now, of course, all the key elements are designed by ourselves, but you just need a very good working prototype that's fun, and then you get Chet's attention. But it shouldn't be nausea-inducing.
Do the art when you're more settled, or do some art props in the beginning, but you can always iterate. It's like, I see VR development, and also like leading back to the question about pricing and so on, like we're at least our team, we're in VR because we want to make a lot of games. And we want to continue making VR games, so we're learning each time we're doing something. And sometimes we make good choices, sometimes bad, but the important thing is that you always move forward.
Yeah.
Get your demo out.
All right,
And
well,
get
thank
your
you.
demo out.
Thank you.